3,
2, 1.
1.
Welcome back, Ashley Pigott from Ashley Pigott Events to the VIP Collective. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So nice to see you again.
Nice to be back.
As always. So today we're diving in and we're talking about tented weddings. Now, I feel like, especially with what's happened since March, which is hard to believe now, we've been in 6 months.
It's crazy.
COVID-19 and still figuring out what exactly that is. But what we know is it's turned our world around a little bit. And I think now some couples who are getting married into the future, or maybe they just got engaged, some of them may be considering a tented wedding. I mean, there's pros to it, there's cons to it, and we're going to talk about both of those. But I thought it'd be a good opportunity because you are the specialist with tents. I mean, we talked about it when you were here for the podcast the first time.
I love tents.
You're always in a tent doing something somewhere. You said mostly Muskoka, sometimes Niagara.
Yep.
So I thought it would be interesting to go on about this and inform some of our
let's talk
listeners.
about it. I mean, honestly, my phone, like the majority of the inquiries and things that I'm getting, and you're right, like a lot of people are just getting engaged over the summer, and the majority of the phone calls I'm getting are for tented weddings. Now that very well could be just because I do so many of them, but I do think that people are aware. They've seen what happened this year. They know kind of what the restrictions allowed them to be able to do. So people are trying to navigate and create a framework that they think they can feel comfortable and confident that like is likely going to happen. Nobody wants to be in the situation that these couples were in this year, which is nice because then, you know, all of these new couples for 2021 and beyond, they have a bit of knowledge and power behind like making these decisions that can make them feel a bit more comfortable as they move forward and make those decisions. Nothing's guaranteed, but I think, you know, the information and kind of what we lived through this summer set a bit of a framework that they can work within and feel pretty good about.
Love it. And so now we're going to give it, well, you're the specialist here. I'm going to ask the questions, but essentially we're going to talk about this. And then we also opened it up on Instagram, both you and I on the platforms, if people did have questions. So we received a few questions that we're going to address as well, which is awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sending those in to everyone. So let's get rolling and let's talk about priorities. So let's say you are a bride or a couple who has decided, you know what, I think I would like to have a tent wedding. Like, let's start talking about this. What do you think are the first 3 priorities that they should think about?
Well, the first one's easy, like hire a planner, hire a team, hire the right people to support you and help you. A tented wedding is no small feat. Even the easiest tented weddings have logistics that we kind of come across and have to work around, and, you know, an experienced team and people who've done it before, the knowledge that they have to bring to the table is really valuable, and they've been in circumstances before that they can then, you know, we can all learn from, and you get the benefits of it. So I think hiring someone who, you know, has the experience to guide you. I mean, I'm never going to say, you know, I started somewhere too. Someone gave me my first tented wedding and I figured it out. But I do think you want to pull from resources that have, you know, that kind of support that can really help you guide you through this.
So obviously hiring a team is something we know is going to benefit someone, but what are what are some of the things that you've seen, or what are some of the things that are overlooked? Because, you know, we obviously know having a team is going to be, and having support is so important.
So important. Yeah. And you think about the teams that are really supporting you. So a planner who has done a tented wedding before, who understands what it is to work out of town, to not have the resources available to you, like at the blink of an eye, that somebody from a rental company can put something in a cab and send it to you if it got forgotten. Like those things happen. And when you're outside of the city, like you just don't have the resources there, and the timing just won't allow for it. So,
you know what we also talked about when you were here was that you mentioned, and I think this falls kind of in this category as well, but in the summer when there's tented weddings, there's a lot of heat. And knowing the lifespan of flowers to travel in that heat out of the city to go wherever they may be going. And then once they get there, they're going to have a fridge, or they're going to need some kind of coolant, right?
Somewhere cool. Yeah. And I think that like all of your vendors fall into this. Hire someone who has experience, because if you're hiring a florist who's never done an out-of-town wedding, who has never done a tented wedding, you know, those variables throw so many logistics at them, like things that I actually don't even necessarily know about, because that's like fully for their team to manage, like a refrigerated truck. You know, I know that they're going to need power when they arrive to plug in that truck, or they're going to need space to park it, or they're going to need a shady spot in a boathouse to put, you know, sensitive blooms. But there's a lot of logistics that go in to that specific vendor, as well as many others that, you know, again, they learn even me, even now, like I do a tented wedding and I still learn something on every single tented wedding, because they're all so different and unique. And then with the next tented wedding, I'm able to take all that bag of experience with me. And I think that that's really important. And, you know, you're going to spend a lot of money on your wedding, and you want it to be executed really, really well. So hiring a team of professionals that get it, that know, even when it comes down to photo and video. Like, I mean, I'm sure, you know, we're always thinking about the position of the tent. We're thinking about where's the podium, but then where does the sun set? Like, you know, all of those things come into play that you don't necessarily have to think about in a venue. I mean, we talked about that on one of our podcasts as well, actually, making sure like the band and the microphone isn't like growing out of your head, like those kinds of things. But you know, you really do need to think about, you need to pull out a compass and you need to go, okay, we're laying out our floor plan right now. Where exactly does the sun go? What time of year are we? Are we June and July where it's sunny until 9:30, or are we September where the sun sets at like, you know, 7 o'clock? So, definitely the team in every category, you want to ask the question, have you done this before? Again, everyone starts somewhere, but I think my advice would be to hire someone who has a bit of experience.
And I think especially now, because we are moving into fall. So we're moving into fall of 2020, and the sun is setting a lot earlier. So we're seeing it now, I think it's around, is it even before 7:30, I believe.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think when you get into late September, even October, you have to start factoring in, are you going to have light or sunset for your grand entrance? Are you going to have any light or sunset for your speeches? And if you're not, are you going to have power available so that the videographers can at least plug in some lights? Or are you going to have an AV team come in and have podium lights and have the full setup? So
an AV team and production team are one of the most, if not the most important on a tented wedding, maybe aside from your planner, but like they make everything work, which is really valuable. They have the power, they're the lights, they're the sound, like they are helping you establish and create the venue in all the back end ways, that like the not so pretty ways and the stuff that you don't really see when you look at that beautiful photo. But like without them, we're not hanging anything in the ceiling of that tent. We don't have a band, we don't have speeches, we can't see what we're eating, the kitchen can't cook, like all of those things come from that vendor. So it's a really important resource. It's usually the first person I call to go on a site visit with me, maybe along with the tent team, because they also are looking at things from a completely different set of eyes. And all of these people all coming together bring to the table just so much information, and that's going to help you down the road not spend money improperly. Like you're going to spend it on the things that you need to. You're also not going to overlook or miss anything, because we're all looking at everything from all of these different angles to make sure that nothing gets missed. Because again, most tented weddings are outside of, you know, the GTA, which means that access to anything is about 45 minutes to an hour away typically. And there's only so much you can really get away with forgetting. So you need to have the people who know what they're doing with you.
That's the thing too. When you pull from so many different professionals, everyone knows their role in that day and what they're going to need to do. And then everyone can work together. And especially, you know, you're the one kind of coordinating all of that with everyone and pulling that information out. But absolutely.
Yeah, like you definitely get into a groove with teams in various categories that kind of you work with a lot. So you feel confident and you trust them, and you know that the process is going to be really, you know, I hate to ever use the word easy, but seamless. And like you're going to work together to overcome any of the challenges that you're going to overcome, because you inevitably will have a challenge. And no one can ever handle that alone. Like it always is going to be a team effort. So I think, you know, working with people that you know, as a planner, I'm going to, you know, definitely recommend teams that I have worked with before, because I can stand behind what service and product they're going to put forth. And I also know that like, if something happens, they've got our back. Like, I know that they're going to drop what they're doing and help me. And like, somebody needs to like drive to Home Depot to get plywood because it's like pouring rain and we need to get something onto the grass. Like, somebody is going to do that when you're working with a team that maybe you don't know, or you don't have a planner. You know, you don't necessarily have those relationships established to be like, we're in this together. Like, we are going to do this, whether that's my role or the florist role or the caterer's role. Like, we're all jumping in to help each other, because it's all for the greater good.
So what do you think, since you've done so many weddings, what do you think are maybe 3 like logistical things that could be overlooked? Whether it's, you know,
Oh yeah.
and I have a list too, but what do you think are the top 3 that you think?
So the first one is power. I think people really underestimate how much power it takes to facilitate an event, especially if you have things like live music, maybe depending on how many people you have, your kitchen setup. Like, people sometimes think that we use the main kitchen in like the main house or cottage or whatever, and that's pretty much never the case. Maybe as a small satellite kitchen for hors d'oeuvres or cocktails or something like that, but we almost never go into the main house. So people don't necessarily realize that you need a generator. That generator has to power your event, your kitchen, your washrooms. Like, it's something I don't think people really put enough value into. So it's usually an education discussion once we get there. So power would definitely be one. I think overall with tents, most people don't think about the things that aren't the pretty things, the things that you don't see, the things that cost a lot of money that you don't ever really feel like you get value out of, because it's like, not the fun stuff. It's not the flowers and all of that. It's like the washroom trailer,
The
and
garbage
the power, the garbage bin. Yeah. Like, that kind of stuff is just, it's really important, because without it, the event doesn't happen. But it's an investment, right? Like, it has to, we have to get the garbage contained somewhere, especially if you're up north, because like, nobody wants bears crashing their wedding.
And
Not a good look.
They would love to be invited.
They would love to be invited. The food's delicious.
They want some sandwiches or some steak for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. What else is on your list?
Mostly garbage and parking.
Parking's a great one. Yeah. People do not think about parking. Honestly, most of the time we usually tell guests not, like, they're drinking, right? So we usually want to bus them in from wherever they're staying. Again, most of these tented weddings that I'm doing are not in the GTA. So if it's in the GTA, it's a little bit different because people are Ubering and such. But if you're out of town, Niagara, Prince Edward County, Muskoka, generally speaking, we're trying to bus all of our guests from the hotel to the property and back, so that we're not having to clutter, you know, cottage roads and stuff with cars. It's the quickest way to make your neighbors mad. Like, the quickest way to make your neighbors mad is them trying to get to their house or get to their cottage and not being able to get through this like long line of cars. It's also, you know, if you are at your cottage, you go there for peace and quiet, and it just feels like a lot when people kind of see that stuff. So I try to avoid it as much as possible.
So I have a question playing off that then. If you are deciding to have a tent wedding on your property, are you knocking on your neighbor's door to let them know this?
That's a great question.
There will be a party.
I 100% think you need to let your neighbors know. Again, if you don't, and they start to hear this band or DJ going late, they're going to get irritated if they have young kids, or like, it just depends. So I always say, let your neighbors know. You know, it goes a long way. You drop off like a nice bottle of wine or a basket of muffins and a little note from the couple. If it's a private property, so they know their neighbors. So if you say like, oh, Corinne's getting married, you know, write this cute little note, you know, we hope you don't mind, it might be a little bit loud. They're gonna be like, oh, Corinne, I can't believe she's getting married. That's so cute. You know, like they're usually really good about it if they know.
More receptive.
They can plan for it. Maybe they don't go to their cottage that weekend, or maybe they, you know, go visit another friend. Like, you know, they can make arrangements. If you surprise them, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get someone showing up with a noise complaint. Technically, 11 p.m. is a noise bylaw in Ontario. So after 11 o'clock, you do need to turn your volume on your music way, way down. If you're on a private property, that's kind of up to you to decide how late you want to go.
So that bottle of wine might go a long way then.
It goes a long way. Yeah, exactly. Like if you're a tented wedding up at like a resort, for example, you abide by the noise bylaw. 11 o'clock, they make you move inside. You have what they call like an after party inside, which we've done many, many times at resorts, Niagara or Muskoka. But if you're on a private property, yeah, you have a lot more flexibility. And again, just it really is dictated by your neighbors. So
you know, it is one of my favorite stories of you. This is going off topic a little bit, but it's similar in the sense that you were taking a flight and you were going west like years ago, I think when Grace was born, and you created little snack bags for your neighbors on the flight.
I did.
To say, just in case she cries.
It was so cute. I did. They were little Ziploc bags and it had like earplugs, Smarties, like a couple of little tchotchkes, and then a little note that said like, hi, my name is Grace. It's my first flight. I'm going to try to be on my best behavior, but if I cry, it's because I'm scared or my ears hurt. My parents are doing the best they can. And it was so cute. Actually, the pilot came out and like just thought it was the most adorable thing, but realistically it was her first flight. We were flying for it's like 5.5 hours. And I just didn't know what to expect. You hear these horror stories. And I used to be that person on the plane being like, oh,
yeah. See, you know? But the same principle carries over. It's just, you know,
be nice to your neighbors.
Be nice to your neighbors, and you know that someone may get upset about something. So
she was a celebrity on that flight. People were going back and forth to the washroom, being like, "Hi, Grace, how's it going?" It was like really cute. But cute. It does. Kindness goes a long way, no matter what you're talking about. But you know, when it comes to this, these are these people's homes as well, and sometimes the proximity is pretty close when you get up to some of these cottages. So being nice to them. Sometimes, you know, depending on how well they know them, they'll invite them over and say, come for a cocktail. Most of the time they never come, but sometimes just that gesture alone is like just nice. And people feel like, oh, it's nice. They even thought to invite us. How sweet of them.
Right. Or make sure that your letter is clear and you're not stating it as an invite. Yeah. Because then you could end up having
enjoy this bottle of wine at your house.
At your house. Don't feel free to cross the road during the wedding.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then I wanted to ask, just because we talked about the sun and how important light is, and like, this is something I always stick on as a videographer.
Of course.
But do you have an app? So I have an app. I want to see if you have an app that measures the sun. Which one do you use?
I'm not sure. Reed told me what to download and I downloaded it. It also has a compass. So basically what I'll do when I go on to a site visit is I can pull it out and I can input the date of the wedding, and then it'll tell me exactly the sun path on that particular day. So I know where to position the tent, speeches, ceremony. Like I can get a lay of the land of what it's going to look like. Because usually I'm seeing these properties at the very beginning of the season in like April or May, or sometimes it's late fall. Like it's not often that we're going, you know, in the middle of the summer. So trying to assess light was something that it took me a while to actually, I don't know, like figure all that out. It's kind of a system you guys have going on, and I definitely don't have it perfect, but now that I have this tool, it does help me. Because, you know, the first couple of years doing tents, you know, those would be one of those things, lesson learned, is being like, oh, the sun is like, oh, it's like in not such a great spot. I wish they were like a little bit over this way, but I didn't have the tools then. So this is that experience. You kind of learn as you go.
Love it. The one that
we also actually have a decibel reader. I have a decibel reader on my phone
for noise.
So if someone does call and say that, you know, there's a noise complaint, I can walk the property with the production team, and I can actually see how loud it is at any particular point in the property. And that way we can adjust the volume levels accordingly after 11 if we need to.
With the AV team.
With the AV team.
That's the key.
It's
not you turning the volume down. It's literally going to the AV team, and they're taking out their iPad usually, and they're adjusting everything. So that
yes. You do not touch the tech console.
No. The one we use is called Sun Seeker.
I think that's what I have.
So it's a paid app, but it's pretty amazing because you can actually see, like you said, the compass, and it tells you the time frame, and so it gives you a lot of cool benefits. But
yeah, totally
love it. And then the other logistical thing is bathrooms. Like,
it's not pretty, but you have to think about it, and you have to think about where are they. Yes, because so for example, Muskoka, you're usually somewhere near the water, and like the grade of Muskoka goes from like your driveway and your cottage to the water. So depending on your property, you likely can't get washrooms too close. We have floated them many times. on a barge, like next to a boathouse, if it was the closest proximity we could get, or, you know, we have to drop them on the driveway, and, you know, we have to communicate with guests, like where they are. Like that is definitely one of the, probably the biggest challenge is figuring out the washrooms, because they're big. It's a big footprint. And whenever it comes, it does not move.
Right. And also lighting to get to the washroom. So
Yes.
if it's going to be like, you know, a few feet away during the day, it's great. But then in the evening, you don't want anyone tripping, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's that. Okay. But
and
let's
who
say
cleans them? Who cleans them all night? Right?
Well,
like that kind of stuff, right?
No,
like
we're not going to go there.
We're not going to go there. It's true. These are
That's
all
not
the
pretty.
things.
No,
Definitely not pretty.
that is the guts. There's no question. But let's say this, and a lot of what we've been focused on is a bride who's having it potentially at their cottage
Property, yeah.
or their own private property. Now, what if I am getting married and I want to have a tent wedding, but I don't necessarily have the property to do it? Like, what are my options then?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of options. You can always rent. There are quite a bit actually of venues like cottages or private estates or, you know, old homes, mansions, things like that are available.
With backyard space.
Yeah, that you can do that allow events. There are quite a few of them that we have found over the last couple of years. Definitely a bit more into the insurance side of things and such when you start doing that kind of a rental, but definitely available. Pricey, because the rentals are usually like the houses to get a property big enough to put a tent on are usually, especially in the middle of summer, like summers are short and prime here. So
I need to interject with a question. So if you're going to have a 50-person or 70-person wedding, what kind of tent, like, is that still costly even to find the property in order to construct a tent for 50 people?
Well, it just depends on the land that the tent needs to go on. So if the land is flat, or you have a tennis court, or like a helicopter pad or something like that, like, you know, amazing. If you have a terrace that's big enough, like those are all flat, easy installs, because you're just like putting a tent on top of it. But not all landscapes allow for that. And sometimes we actually are like building over a garden bed or building over, you know, whatever might be there in order to kind of go on top of it to have the square footage to put a tent. So in that case, you know, it's just a completely different install, because we're building a floor, right? Structures and things like that go into that. So, so it just depends. It depends on the number of people, the size of your tent that would be needed, your setup, like your layout, whether it's part of your rain plan or not. And of course, like what the property has available to you.
Is there an actual dimension of a tent that you could say, well, if you're having 70 people, you would need at least X by X number? Is there like that standard across the board, or no?
Well, so pre-COVID, most of my weddings sat in and around the 150-ish person mark. And I would say we use like a 40 by 80 size tent most frequently. That shape, a rectangular shape, works really well, and the dimensions there allowed nicely for like a good layout and floor plan. So that gives you like a bit of a sense.
A bit of a guideline. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, you know, if someone's looking at all these dimensions and like, I don't know which dimension is
a tennis court.
Too big.
A tennis court is like the size of what we would need for like 150 to 180 person wedding. So now that we're kind of scaling sizes and things like that back, I think again, it just depends on the layout. Like sometimes we've done square, and, you know, we've done where they're like narrow and really long, just because that's what the property allowed for. But the tent team will also help guide you with your number. Like if you don't have a planner, which you should, but if you don't, you know, your tent team can also draw you layouts of what that square footage will give you in terms of like round tables, long tables, a head table. Like you can communicate what you need to have in that tent, and they can usually scale it out for you. There's also a lot of really good free like websites and things like that you can play with and do some of those layouts and try to get a sense of what is the best footprint for you.
And then in regards to the tent team, so their main responsibility is obviously to figure out the structure that's needed to go in the space that you're looking to rent. What about, do they talk to the couple at all about power drops, lighting, like any of these logistic things we've talked about, or is their main focus the tent and the structure?
Yeah, I mean, anybody that you're hiring is a specialist in their own category. So while the tent team has experience and can guide you, they really don't necessarily know the ins and outs. Because to be perfectly honest, when lighting and power and all of that come in, the tent team is gone.
Right.
Pretty much, right? Like that, the order of events would mean that they are likely gone. So, they may be able to guide you on some information, but they're not going to be able to manage it for you. And that, I think, is, as we talked about priorities, like hiring the right team, kind of just circling back on that, every category that you hire, photo, video, catering, floral, tent, production, they're a specialist in their category. Their focus is to execute their service agreement in that category with you. Their job isn't to oversee everything. And that's why having a planner is so important, because their job is exactly that. Make sure everybody's doing what they need to be doing and that the plan comes together consistently. And that's specifically their job versus, trying to talk to the tent company about power. Well, like they might know, but like they probably don't actually really know. They can talk to you about the structure of the tent, engineering, weight, and like load bearing, stuff like that. They'll be able to guide you on. But ultimately that information needs to then get relayed to the florist or the draping company, or, so there's a lot of pieces that I think are really important to have someone who knows what they're doing overlook it. And if you are really knowledgeable, you may be able to do that on your own. But I think, there's definitely some obstacles you'll come across that having some information to help you would be better.
Back to light.
Back to light. Of course.
And this falls with what we're talking about, but if you do get a structure of a tent, and then do the tent companies usually say, well, there's a light in the tent, because there isn't.
I mean, you can. I shouldn't say that. You can. You definitely, the tent companies have the option for lighting and such. Any of the weddings that I do, they don't provide that, because typically we have a production team and then we have a florist. So the team's a little bit more elaborate. But yes, I would say for sure, most tent companies will have the option for you to add in kind of simple or basic items, like maybe a string light option.
Or even those like construction lights that kind of clip up the top.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's what is offered, but I was just curious to know, like, if they said, oh, we can provide you this, like one light that can be, at the top.
Yeah, like a wash or like a spotlight or something like that.
Not even that fancy. I'm not even thinking that fancy, but maybe this is because I've been to some country tent weddings. They had like more of like
floodlight, like a big floodlight.
A floodlight.
We've used those before. We've done some farm weddings where the properties are just so big and we kind of just need to like flood a massive amount of light for people to get to and from the washrooms or the driveway. But yeah, I mean, yes, you speak to your tent team. They'll be able to show you the options that they have available to you. And if those work for you, great. And if not, there are other options you can explore.
And what about, so sticking on if you don't have the property, so we know you can rent like certain places, and then out of city mostly, or are there any in city that you're familiar with that could
There are some, there are definitely some, like when you get into, like there's a house on the Bridle Path that's been available for rent for a while. You have to be a little bit, what's the word? I guess you just need to go into things with asking the right questions, because if you are taking a rental, you just need to make sure that you're booking things a year out. Things can change. Property ownership can change. Like, you just need to make sure that you're reading your contracts really, really well. I think we've all learned over the last few months, like contracts are king. So, reading through those. But rentals are a great option for a lot of people. It definitely is nice. You can get, a big house or cottage with it, and your family, your bridal party, everyone can stay there. So you kind of double dip on accommodations, which is nice. You're usually getting it for a week. So you could do like a welcome bonfire. You can do a brunch. Like, you have this property available. And I
that
usually
sounds like a fun party.
It'd be fun, right? So
I like that idea.
And the girls can get ready there. It just, it definitely can work really, really well. It definitely feels like you have your own property that way.
Question. Nice. You're not going to rent somewhere.
Yeah.
What's another option?
There are options. I actually think is a really smart business model that a few venues outside of the city have set up, where they basically put up a tent and you rent the tent from them. But then you're not taking on all the expense and the cost. The infrastructure is set up for you. So you're basically walking into it. There's a number of them in Niagara that do this. And I think it's super, super smart. I wish there were more of them up in Muskoka. Sadly, there just are not. And I think that there are a couple like east, like the Prince Edward County way of the world is becoming a thing. So I think that will also be something we'll see out there. And those are really great because they generally have a tent, a floor, power. Someplace, may have catering or like might already have a restaurant. Like some of these vineyards and such can cater your wedding, which is great. So a lot of the question marks are kind of removed from your planning experience. So I think that that's a really great option for someone who maybe is not going to be hiring a planner, because there are just so many logistics removed when you kind of are walking into a setup like that. And, there are some great options out there. So I definitely think, and I think that we'll see more and more of them over the next couple of years as this becomes, an even bigger trend than it already was, but now just with the restrictions and what's allowed. And I think that we'll see more and more venues making the decision to either invest in a tent or partner with a tent company to allow this as like an additional option to offer to people.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk now. Obviously that was phase one, or priority number one, which was a lot of info, but a lot of great info and very important, having a team, as we've just heard. And so number two, what's the second priority if you're considering doing hosting a tent wedding?
You need to have a really good rain plan, like really good, like so good.
But why? Why do I have to have a rain plan?
It's so realistic. It is just so realistic that it is going to be something that you encounter, and you need to be okay with that. So I think the first thing when you're deciding that you want to have a tented wedding is you can't stress about the weather for a year leading up to your wedding. Because if you are going to stress about the weather for a year, looking at what the Weather Network and like pulling stats from years past, and it's probably maybe not the right environment for you, because
a tent wedding,
if the rain
is really going to scare you.
Weather is absolutely nothing we can control. There's nothing we can do except plan for it. So we do spend a lot of time on our rain plan, a lot of time, because you need to love it. You might not love it. You probably won't love it as much as plan A, of course, but you need to know what it is. You need to be okay with it, because if on the day of your wedding or the day before the wedding, the weather changes, we need to adapt the plan. It's not a surprise. You've already wrapped your head around it. You know what it is. Everyone's on the same page and it can be executed. And there's really nothing that needs to, like, I don't need to go to a bride and be like, okay, it's going to rain. Now let's talk about what we're going to do. Nobody's doing that the day before your wedding. And if your planner is, you need to call someone else. But realistically, like it's a very real part of your wedding plan. So whether you are making the choice to, the easiest kind of plan is to just go into the tent and do everything in the tent. I'd say that's probably the hardest sell to most of my couples, because like it's like a 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. party. Like that's a really long time to be in this one footprint with walls closed and that. So, it's usually the last resort. We usually try to get creative depending on the property, what's available to us. We've had options before where our rain plan was the first level of the main house.
Now, I want to interject just to clarify. You're talking rain plan for the ceremony, which is typically meant for outdoors. And then we obviously go into the tent. We live in
Ontario. You have to have a tent for dinner. It's like a non-negotiable. I mean, if you're having a micro wedding where it's like 10 or 20 people and, you're at your house on a terrace in the backyard, and if it rains, you move inside or whatever, like that's a different story. But if you're talking like 100 people, you just can't, like even if it's not even for rain, like you have to think about protecting people from the sun. That kind of stuff also plays into it. A lot of the times we're getting asked for tents, like a clear top tent in the middle of July. And people just don't even realize, because they see the pictures and it's so pretty and I love it and this is what I want. And it's like, but you've created a greenhouse and your guests are going to be sweating and they're going to be so uncomfortable and they're going to be eating this like beautiful dinner in, their fancy, fanciest garb, but they're going to be like so uncomfortable and they're just going to want to go home. Right.
Or then you have to invest more money into air conditioning because maybe you're going to air condition the tent.
Air conditioning is like a whole other, that's
a whole other beast. Yeah.
Like a whole podcast on its own. Air conditioning is, you don't see it a lot. It's logistically challenging. It's also really expensive. But if you are able to, there's lots of other things. There's like fans, there's misting fans. Like a lot of the times we don't
misting fans.
Yeah. Have you not seen this? Like
I haven't seen those.
Like you see them on patios, where it just like spritzes out mist but it evaporates. Like you don't get wet, but it evaporates in the air and it just cools things down. We've used those before, but the rain plan is something that you need to develop. And sometimes it's not the obvious. Like I said, going into the tent usually isn't what my clients are looking for. They want to create something like a different environment, a different space. So like I said, if it's the first floor of a house or a cottage, if it's a boathouse and we fill in the slips, we've used main boathouse before. So you just kind of have to get creative and present some options.
What about another tent over the ceremony, a smaller?
Totally. If your property allows for it, for sure. That's always an option. Yes.
Cool. Okay. Let's talk about number three. Which is?
Oh, number 3 is my favorite.
What is number 3?
Realistic expectations. Like you need to be realistic. And that's it kind of encompasses everything that we just talked about, like hiring a team and having a good rain plan and thinking about all the logistics, and all of that ties into having an established, realistic set of expectations. And that is in every way possible, from, your setup and your property and what you can do versus maybe what you originally thought you might have wanted to do, your budget, like what you see and what it actually costs. I think a lot of people, they're on Instagram, they're on Pinterest, they see all these beautiful photos, they follow us, they see what we're doing, and these like magical settings that that is why I love tented weddings. Like they're just so unique and so special, and they feel like, we use that word a lot, but like they really do feel like magic. Like you're a part of something that was built from the ground up and tomorrow it's gone. No one's ever going to experience it again. And that's why I love them so much. So, but there's like a cost that comes with that. So that's a big piece of kind of educating clients on what that means and all these little intricacies that go into a tent wedding, expectation on weather and rain, that's a big piece of it.
Well, I love what you even just said with the expectation of having a clear roof on the tent. And then the reality is that your guests are actually dripping in sweat and they don't feel as good as what the photos look like, and that comes down to guest experience as well, which is...
Guest experience is so important. Like it's so, so important. You've invited all of these people to come and celebrate with you. You have to think about like their experience needs to be something that you actually physically walk through. Like that's one thing that I do before guests arrive. I start about an hour before we're set for guests to arrive. And I take one of my team members, usually Chris, because we love him.
Chris.
And we arrive at like the front door or the property or where the bus is going to be dropping off. Or sometimes we start at the hotel and we like take the whole path. Like who's the hotel greeter? Who's sending them on the bus? What's on the bus? And we kind of like take that whole path. They arrive. Where do they go next? What's their path? Where are they walking? Are there lights? Is there anything in their way? Is there any, like, can they see the generator? All of that stuff. I fully walk it because that sets the tone for the rest of their night. Right. And then, that experience from ceremony to cocktails. What does it look like? Is the grass wet? Do we need little things?
Do you try the cocktails to make sure that they're...
That's usually Chris's domain, to be honest. My team usually kind of takes that one. But sometimes. Yeah. We did slushy margaritas for one of our weddings a couple years
They
ago.
always look so, especially on the hot day, like when we go over and we're filming them, and they're just magic.
And you're just like, can I have this now?
Can I please have this?
I did have that one. It actually was I think 2 years ago this coming weekend, and it was boiling. It was like a heat wave. I was very pregnant, and I had a virgin margarita. But yeah, so those things are important for you to, as a planner, or if you don't have a planner, as a bride, as a groom, as a couple, walk that experience, like see exactly what they are going to see, because you will inevitably be like, oh, we need to move that needs to go. Like those just little tweaks, but they will make a difference.
And if you're the bride, you can't necessarily do that beforehand because you're experiencing your day. So you're not going to be able to take a golf cart or take a bus or
but they can do it in the morning, or they can do it at the day before if things are set up. But ultimately, again, yes, you're right. And having a good team to rely on is going to be really important.
And that, my friends, is what we call a hot tip on the VIP Collective. Right. Now, I want to segue into the Instagram questions that we received from our amazing followers. We love you all.
Thanks, guys.
So,
I love a good question box.
I know. And it's good to know just what they're experiencing, what they don't understand, and what it is that, you can answer for them, especially in this area. So speaking on guest experience, we're kind of going to play off that, because the first question that came in was, do you always need a floor for a tent, or can it be grass or dirt? Like, do I have to put the investment in?
It can never be dirt. It can never be dirt.
Never dirt. Okay.
Never be dirt.
No dirt.
So this is an amazing question. So whoever wrote this question, I think it's such a fantastic question. I am always on team floor. If it's in the budget, 100%, I think you should have a floor. You don't have to, there's lots of different kind of tiers of the ways to do your floor. You can do a lay of the land floor, which is basically a plywood that goes directly on a flat surface. So like a tennis court or flat grass or such. You can cover that in an event carpet. You can cover that in like a vinyl that looks really, really nice. I've also done the plywood where we've whitewashed it and stained the actual wood itself.
Oh, cool.
For our floor, because it works best for the design. So there's definitely a couple of different options available. But I think if you can fit it in your budget in some capacity, get a floor. Your guests don't always anticipate that they're going to be walking on grass. If it rains, their experience is now terrible. Your experience is now not so great, because rain water comes off the tent and then it needs somewhere to go. So naturally, you have to think about the slope of the ground that you're on. So if you're putting a tent on top of grass that's sitting next to a hill, all that water is then going to pool near where your tent is, or it's all going to come off the sides of the tent, and it's going to create like a moat of water all the way around your tent. Like, having a floor totally, it doesn't completely mitigate a lot of those issues, because your floor still gets wet and people are traipsing it in and out and stuff, but it's much, much better if you can do it.
Especially if your guests, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, especially if your guests are in high heels, because the experience, I've had an experience of going to a wedding, being a guest, wearing high heels, and the dance floor was
the only wood floor
finished. Yes. And then everything around was grass. And I personally didn't know that was what was going to happen. And so I spent the entire night on grass in my high heels. And so my feet were
and your shoes were ruined.
Upset, and the shoes were quite muddy.
And I think that there are, like, I have done the tented weddings on grass. We've done one of them in all the years, which is kind of actually tells you my position right there. But the wedding was beautiful. They lucked out. They got great weather. I think if you're going to go down that route, which you certainly can, and again, budget is a big driver on whether or not you can afford a floor. And so if you can't afford a floor, I think, you just need to be very practical in thinking about the distance that guests are going to have to walk to and from your tent, and what that would look like if it rained, whether or not there's a walkway or anything that you can kind of create to make that experience a lot nicer. A tent on grass can be really beautiful. You see those like still water tents, and like, this is very, California Pinterest inspiration that we see, are all of these beautiful weddings that don't necessarily need it, but it's just a different climate. So I'm always on team floor if it's within budget. And if it's not within budget, then, you just need to I would order your tent a little bit bigger than you need it. Because if that happens and it starts to pool in on the edges of your tent, any of those tables who are too close to the edge are now moved in. So you're really kind of allowing, a little bit more space for people to move around, if that's something that you're going to kind of come into.
Interesting. And maybe offer your guests, if you aren't going to opt for a floor, offer your guests the heel stoppers, the ones that go on your heels. Like,
totally. We use those a lot. Honestly, what I would say 100%, if you're doing something on grass, actually, even if you're not doing something on grass, if you're like at a farm or you're at a cottage, you should include that information for your guests in your details card on your invitation. Like,
hot tip.
We've done We've done farm weddings before where we've said like farm friendly footwear, just so people kind of start, because if you don't have anything there, they're going to assume it's status quo. But if there's something there, it gets them thinking, and like maybe they'll wear a block heel or a wedge or something like that. I did have one bride who was very specific in her details card that said, please do not wear stilettos, because it was like gravel and then grass, and it just like really would have made people uncomfortable. So she did, she put it in, and that's a really great way to communicate it. But always having like a little basket of those heel protectors is a good thing.
Love it. Okay, question number 2. And this is something we did touch on, but we did have someone looking for recommended spaces for land or venues that are ideal for tented weddings. So if you're not going to rent like an Airbnb, then you mentioned going to like somewhere in the Niagara region, or
like Kurt's has 2 locations on their property, Kurt's Orchard, that are really beautiful. But there are a couple for sure. And as I said, I really do think that there will be more and more venues that are offering this now, because it allows them to offer more events and to do more events and to create some revenue, and also will allow them some flexibility depending on kind of how things go over the next couple months.
Love it. Okay, next is talking about the cancellation policy. If you did have a tent booked and then you are looking at the weather app and it's saying it's going to be pure sun on your day, what does that require for with tent companies? What's cancellation?
So you still need a tent in pure sun is my like first thing. I think you always need a tent. We live in Ontario. We don't live in California where we can like bank on a couple of days like with no rain and like really like actually bet on it. I just think here it's really, really hard to do that. Now you do have the option with the tent team, depending on how you structure your contract with them and on-site support. But if it's beautiful, like panels can be removed, you can open things up, but the structure I think you still want to have. A lot of tent companies do things differently. So definitely read your contract. Some tent companies will allow you to reserve the inventory with a 50% deposit. And then, Monday or Tuesday before we're setting up, you make the rain call, and they're usually ceremony tents, walkway tents, washroom trailer tents, those kinds of things that we may not necessarily invest in if we don't have to, depending on how things have rolled out. So, it definitely is an area where don't risk it. It's your venue. Don't risk it. Put a tent up and cancel the other pieces if you're not going to need them. Some tent companies do have you pay in full, whether you use it or not. So I just think be really mindful of what you're signing off on in your contracts. Ask them, should I be holding this inventory? Do you find that, walkway, pathway tents and such, you have a fair bit of inventory? If so, can I kind of add this on later? But if they have flexibility, reserve the inventory, because I think, 2021, 2022 are going to be very, very hot tent years. So you just don't want to risk not being able to have what you actually need to facilitate your event, especially if you're at a private property and you're out of town. You need to be able to have the resources available to you.
And I think what's important too is if you are securing a tent for your date and you have to put down a deposit, they are turning away other clients to hold that inventory for you. So if you decide 4 days before your wedding, we don't need it anymore, there would be a cost associated with that, because they've actually turned other people away due to that.
100%. So usually the deposit's lost if you don't use it. Or again, some charge in full completely, or some risk it and say, you know what, we're going to add it on Tuesday or Wednesday when we see the forecast. And then, it's really based on availability of what you can have. But again, I really think that those are for the other pieces, the ceremony, the walkways, those other tents, but you need your main tent. Yeah.
And lastly, last question is...
are we there? Are we done? No.
Well, we're on the last question, but that doesn't mean we're done. Although we could go on forever.
Always.
What do you think has been one of the biggest mistakes for a tent wedding? Or what's a mistake?
I think your mistake is if you don't hire the right people. I do. I think that I get calls all the time from people who are looking for day of or month of or partial, but they're having a intended wedding. And I just think in my mind, that's going to be so hard to do. Some intended weddings are hard for me to do, and I've done a gazillion of them. So, I hope that they have like a really easy property or layout. Or, I don't offer those services. So I usually will recommend them to people who have tent experience, because, I feel like those people really do need the help. But I think it's that, and I think it's just overlooking all of the, like I said, the not so pretty investments that you need to make. Like, yes, you might want your florals to look exactly like that photo, but realistically, if your guests don't have anywhere to go to the washroom, or the caterer doesn't have anywhere to cook, or you can't have any music or lights because you don't have any power, like, then what's the point of all those flowers? Because they really mean nothing. So, I think just biggest mistakes are probably, what we talked about, like not hiring a good team, not having a good rain plan, and not having realistic expectations of like what this all really means.
Well, that's the thing, is because each wedding in a tent is so different. Like nothing is ever the same. So you're running into challenges, and like you spoke about a lot of it, but it's just on the daily, you don't know what you're going to experience. So it's hard to even pinpoint probably the biggest mistake you can make,
because everything is so different with every wedding. And like I said, like that's why I love I love tented weddings. I love a wedding that's on a private property. I love the intimacy of that kind of celebration. I love the logistics that go into it. Like, doing stuff on an island, like, logistics, like it's so good. I love it. It makes me so happy. And every single tented wedding that we've ever created will never happen again. And only the people who were in that tent or who were invited to that wedding are ever going to even know what that experience was. And to me, that's really special, because, there are a lot of really beautiful and incredible venues in Toronto, and I love working at so many of them. But I do love the fact that so many of these kind of unique, cherished moments have happened that can never be recreated, because it was there, and then by Monday morning, it's gone. Except for some flat, maybe yellow grass, like you'd never know that we were there. So yeah, I think that that's like just makes things really special. And I think that that's why people, especially now, given what we've gone through the last 6 months, perspectives have changed. I think values have changed, priorities have changed. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more of these types of celebrations, because they're small, they're intimate, they're at home, they're in an environment that they can control, sort of, like as best as possible. And I think that kind of is the way for the next little bit. I think people are going to be looking, they're kind of forced into more intimate celebrations, but I think that people are actually opening their mind to realizing that's not actually such a bad thing too, right?
Of course. What do you think? So before we end off here, I would love to know, what's one of the tented weddings that you've planned that you're super proud of, that was like just challenge after challenge, but you just figured it out every single time? And when
all of them, like they all have their own set of challenges, and that's what makes it so interesting. And some of them, the challenge is the tent and the location and the setup, and some of them it's the family dynamics, or right, like every wedding has a set of challenges. And I love tented weddings because I love a challenge. Like I do, I love it. I would say like island weddings are the most challenging, because not only are you kind of building this tent and all of this, but you also have to barge it all over. Your distance, like your resources are even more so limited than they would be on a mainland property. Your setup takes a lot longer. Like barges move really slow. Like really painfully slow.
I saw in the news yesterday that Japan has created their first flying car.
I saw that. And
it's essentially a drone with a person in it. But wait until you can take a car over to the island and drop things off and then come back.
Well, that would be very nice. Would also be really good to like invest in my own helicopter, or my own just like really nice boat could be really good up in Muskoka at least. But yeah, like the logistical challenges and stuff like that are probably the ones that like for me are the most memorable, just because, it feels so good to get this like set of, this is impossible, and like make it possible and make it amazing. That is awesome. I absolutely love when I have the opportunity to do stuff like that. And tent weddings just really do allow me a lot of those opportunities. So I think that's why I kind of, I'm so passionate about them. I love this.
It's funny you say that, because that's what you go after, and it's amazing. And for us, it's like, if we can create a film that makes a groom cry.
Yes.
This is kind of our, like, what we're pushing for is like, we want to make them like have the emotions and feel it. And whenever we get responses back that say like, we loved it, we were crying, blah, blah, blah. And just like, that's why we're doing it. Yeah. So it's funny just to compare the two different aspects of like what you do and what we do.
Totally. Yeah. I love going to a property where they're like, we have no idea how you, like, what we can do here. And, you know, I can present a couple of options and they're always like, wow, like we never even thought about doing that. It's always fun. I mean, a lot of it is dictated by, of course, like, you know, budget and that a lot of that plays into, you know, how creative we can get with some of these setups, but they really make for pretty special events, and they go late and they're fun and you can do whatever you want, you know, like you get to design your wedding from start to finish however you want it within the, you know, structure of a tented type of wedding. My absolute dream. And so if anyone's watching this as a bride or maybe bride to be and you're up for it, please call me. My dream is to do an epic tented wedding on a property where we're actually almost creating a hotel as well, like doing a full, like glamping, like yurts, but like doing like a full experience where we've got a main tent, you know, we've got a wedding, we've got all of that, but we also have like each guest gets their individual yurt. There's like a main dining hall. And like, I really would love to do the logistics on that would just be so incredible. I would love to do it. There's a planner and florist in the States who did something like that last year and I followed it along and I was just like, oh my, like it's literally a dream. Like I would just die to do something like that.
You heard her, folks.
Yeah. Like I just think it would be so cool. And like, what an experience, like honestly and truly, like what an experience for everybody to be there. These yurts that they built for it, like everybody.
You know what you would do? You would do little bags on each pillow that says welcome to.
Of course. It would be like, I mean, I spent years
with earplugs.
Yeah. So, you know, that hotel side of things, I feel like that could be such a great way. You could do something so cool on Friday night, you know, Saturday, the big wedding, and then Sunday, like some sort of cool brunch, but it would be very much like this, like upscale, like luxury glamping experience. So anyways, if anybody's up for it,
a little bit of a wedding
for it,
let's build a wedding resort. Well, I love it. That's good. Cool. Put it out there and it may come.
It may happen.
And how do they contact you if they do want to do that?
So my Instagram or so at Ashley Pigott Events or the website, ashleypigott.com, and the inquiry form there gets right to me so I can send some information.
Awesome. And we'll link everything everywhere so everyone listening can check it out. Ashley Pigott Events. Thank you.
Thank you
so much for joining us. A pleasure as always. And hopefully I see you very soon again.
Hopefully. Anytime.
We had an awesome
shoot. It here.
We had an awesome shoot recently. A couple of weeks
Honestly,
ago.
That was the best part of my summer so far. It felt so good to be back.
How much fun was that though?
Oh, it was so good. And the photos were amazing. We had just such a good team. So we're already talking about the next one.
So if you're not following either of us, or if you aren't yet, you should be, because you're going to see what we created from that shoot. So amazing. Well, let's cheers it out. My dear, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Got VIP merch.
Bye.
Bye.
Yay.